Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to yet another session from Pivot. I'm very excited to be here with you all on Thursday evening for those of you who are joining us from India. So, we have a pretty popular and sort of controversial topic to be discussed today, which is all about work life balance. This is a concept I think that probably came to be after people started working more than 30, 35, 40 hours, to the extent now number keeps changing almost every other week. There's a new leader coming up with what should be the right number that people work every week. And people have a stance for and against this. So we thought it would be better to kind of flesh it out with folks who have seen both sides of the aisle, and will help us understand how to decide how many hours you should work, how to lead a more balanced life, and ultimately how to define success for yourself. So, for that, I'm very excited to have two amazing speakers with me today. We have Krusha, Sahjwani, Malkani, and Yash Agarwal. They are with me backstage. I'll just be bringing them up here. Give me 1 second. All right, great. Hi, Yash. Hi, Krusha. Welcome to the session today. Glad to have you both here.
Hello.
Hi
I
everyone.
hope.
Thanks so much for having us, Arjun.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for making time for this. So, I don't know how much this particular topic has come up around you. I'm sure it's been something you have seen at least on LinkedIn, because people can't stop talking about it, and now it's in mainstream media after all these important, powerful leaders out there have been making statements left and right about what kind of work-life balance employees should have, young generation should have. And not just that, I mean, what we should be doing with our time, whether we should be staring at certain people or not. There's all kinds of pointed and random controversial statements being made. And the funny thing is that everybody has a very strong stance on it, for and against, about whether we should work 40 hours, 70, 90, or something else. So wanted to kind of settle this for once and for all, and that's the reason we are here. So before we dive in, just quick round of intros, and I can go first. So for those who don't know me, I am the founder of Pivot, which is a platform that helps people make smooth and successful career transitions. So, in case you're thinking about changing not just your company, sort of job hopping, but also thinking about, let's say, changing your domain, your industry, your level in the organization, core element shift, think about inflection points. That's really where we specialize. And in each case, our end goal is to help people land their target role. So we'll talk more about that throughout the conversation and perhaps later as well. But I would like to loop in Krusha and Yash into the conversation. Krusha, thanks again for joining us. Please go ahead and maybe share a bit about your journey and what do you do today.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me, Arjun. It's always a pleasure. It's something I like to make time for. So I'm Krusha. I basically coach. I'm an ICF coach exclusively for women. So I help women getting very clear on their goals, like work-life balance or goals in terms of career growth and how all of that ties together and tying it into an action plan to actually making that happen. So that's what I do. I'm also director at a global SaaS company called Sociable. I run the Asia subsidiary, and you see me on LinkedIn, I guess. So I like to write as well.
Perfect. Short and sweet. Thanks, Krusha. Yash, please go ahead.
Sure. Thanks again, Arjun, for having us. Good evening, everyone. My name's Yash. I work in this field called public policy. Still not that well known as a vocation. I I mean, in very brief, I started working in the parliament. I've studied journalism. That's the only degree I have, and then worked at Twitter for a couple of years. Now it's called X for some reasons. And today I work for this firm that, very loosely speaking, like we run the internet, like the entire internet on the technical side of things. And yeah, so I just work on the policy space, and of course, we also run Public Policy India, which is like this pan India community of policy professionals. And if I do find some time apart from that, I love to teach. So that's about it.
Amazing. So I think both of you have experience kind of multi-hatting in different careers, and I'm sure there's a life outside of career as well that we can perhaps delve into, depending on how much you're ready to reveal about things outside of work. So, work life balance, I think this is a term that has come under attack a lot recently, and for different reasons. There are people who are attacking it even though they think there should be a better balance, and there are people attacking it even though they don't think you can balance things always. So you might have heard of terms like work life harmony, work life integration, and that's because people feel you can't always create a perfect equilibrium or a balance, so to speak. Things can change over a period of time, in the same way that there's a work life continuum, where sometimes your life meshes into work, your work meshes into life, so you can't separate out the two really that well. So where I'm going with this is, I just want to start by understanding your board definition of work life balance, right? What does it really mean today to say that we should have or we should strive for work life balance? Krusha, we'll start with you.
Sure. I think one of the reasons, firstly, that it has become the topic it has become is also because we need to recognize that the way we work has really changed, right? It's really evolved, not just from many years ago, but if we just even look pre-COVID, post-COVID, like very recently in all our careers, everyone would have changed the way we work. So I think we need to acknowledge that for me in this whole debate, the main thing is that when we're talking work life balance, I think to me, at least today, and having coached all the women I coach, that it's very personal. And even for the same person, and I say that even for myself, I don't think you can have one constant definition of the word that lasts you your entire life, because I think it looks very different in your 20s, it looks very different in your 30s. And I don't even think you can generalize that, because my 20s could look different from someone else's 20s given background. Like, am I coming with some privilege of some foundation where I don't need to strive to work maybe a certain amount? Am I building on something that already exists, or I'm starting from scratch? Am I going to choose to be a parent or not in my 30s? That changes how my 30s look. So I think it's for me as a starting point probably to the conversation, is that it's very individual to each person, and that's why it's so important for each person to sit down and define what it looks like for them, and do it at a consistent basis on every phase of their life, because it's going to evolve, it should evolve.
Got it. Just one follow up, and then we'll bring in Yash into the conversation as well. But if that's the case, Krusha, then why are all these important, so-called important leaders and folks who are leading lakhs and millions of employees forming this one-size-fit-all stance of
Mm.
that this is what you should strive for, and this is the sort of the perfect work life balance that one should think about in different phases of their life? Like, do these people not know what they're talking about?
I think we would be naive to say that they don't know what they're talking about given the position they are in. If I'm being honest, for me, it's two things. One, we need to also take into account media and the role that plays, whether PR and what that serves. So I don't know, of course, the intricacies of how these conversations work, but today with social media, with PR, there are random strategies we have seen across happening, from Poonam Pandey, saying that she's dead, to multiple other things. So I think also there's no bar there, and I think we need to take everything with a pinch of salt that we hear. You don't know exactly what's been said, what the context is, what the intention behind it was, etc. So I think that's the first thing to put out there with this. The second thing, in terms of why they're saying what they say, again, I think it is individual, so they're probably talking from their worldview, which is two things. One is how they have worked. Most of these people have worked in a different time that doesn't exist today. So one, they're talking from, yes, they probably put in those hours, and that probably did contribute to getting them where it got them at that point. But then also from their point of view, worldview, and what are they running today, and how does this equation work for them? Of course, people working those many hours makes more sense for them. So I'm not surprised that that's their view of how this could function. But maybe a small last thing to say, this thing is, we need to recognize, when I say the way we work has changed, is not just about pre-COVID, post-COVID in terms of hours, flexibility. It's, we are not everyone's not logged off officially the way they used to be leaving an office space before. So that's changed as well. And technology has come in, so maybe the same task that used to take 4 hours to do today can be done in 30 minutes. So should that be taken into account? Women in the workforce were not as much as they are today at all. So should that be taken into account? So I think it's very nuanced. And again, just taking it by one sentence is, for me, it's just PR as opposed to an actual conversation.
All right. All right. Interesting. So Yash, kind of a similar question, but I do want to share a very short anecdote before I, kind of position the next question to you. So prior to starting Pivot, I used to work in management consulting in New York, right? And um, there was one of the leaders at this consulting firm who had been working for, I think, 25 plus years. And I would say he sort of had a love-hate relationship with work-life balance, right? I'll tell you why. So this person probably had achieved the pinnacle of success in his own career in a way. He was sitting at the top, and a lot of times, because our business was very client-centric in consulting, you have to sort of bend over backwards to meet the client's demands every time. So that was the general sense, the culture, that anytime a client would come in with any sort of reasonable or unreasonable demand for a deadline to be met very quickly, we would, in most cases, cater to it, right? And so this person, in most cases, would actually drive, all the junior and mid-level folks to stay back, on weekday evenings, on weeknights, weekends also sometimes, to work hard, right? But at the same time, I remember during the year-end conversations when he would talk about performance of people, he would empathize a lot with folks who had actually done that. Not only would he give them, better performance ratings or pay recommendations, he would also empathize, saying, some of these folks are in their 20s, they don't have the same resources that I have. They don't have, for example, somebody who can go pick out groceries for them. And this is an environment where Zepto didn't exist. So so they didn't have all the resources that he would have. So he would contextualize it. He would understand the challenges, that, let's say, a 25-year-old would go through, that he wouldn't have to because of his means and resources. So, as a founder or as an employer, you have this sort of dichotomy of mindset. And a lot of the people who are coming out saying 70 hours and 90 hours is the thing to strive for, I think they also, like Krusha said, they know what they're doing. I think apart from PR, they also want to make sure the young generations, continue to work very hard, right? Perhaps that's the mindset that they grew up with. So with this in context, right, the founder's perspective or the employer's perspective in context, what is your take about work-life balance?
I think, firstly, just a couple of thoughts building on the question that you asked Krusha earlier, Arjun, right? Um, on the, the statements that make the headlines, right? Let's say some industry leader, some industry captain, whatever. It is, I would say, fairly evident if you, read the whole interview whenever they, I mean, media, of course, picks up one line from the broader bite, right? That they're speaking in context of basically every single industrialized moderately prosperous country today, having seen at least couple of its entire generations, just slogged it off for hours and hours. Right? I'm not suggesting we do that. I'm just providing that context. You take a Korea, Taiwan, or China, what have you, right? There has been that one generation or two consecutively that have really worked very hard, right? For a country to get to a level of prosperity today, where you can make all sorts of different choices, right? That's one thing, right? Now, keeping that aside, the other thing that the point that we're mentioning, what we started the conversation today with, right, which was what is or how do you look at work-life balance, right? I was just thinking about this while Krusha was speaking, while you were asking the question as well. Quite frankly, for me, the whole idea is about making choices that allow me to lead the life that I wish to while doing all the work that I wish to as well, right? It generally is not a trade-off for me. Okay. uh, and by that, I'll just add a level of nuance to this. By that, what I mean is, yes, of course, that moment, especially towards the end of the day when I'm like, oh God, I'm so exhausted, or I did so much today, whatever, right? That's every day, well, literally. But there's never a a tinge of regret, that, oh, why did I do this? Why did I make this choice? Right? For the first 3 4 years of my working life, right, especially given, like, I started from absolutely zero, like completely from scratch, right? But frankly, even today, if I tell my parents what I do, they can't make head and tail of it. Policy is not very common, like, I'm glad I put in the hours that I did in the first few years, right? That has allowed me to get to a space today where, quite frankly, I say a no to like 90 out of 100, let's just say, opportunities coming my way, in terms of work or, other engagements. That's one thing. Again, I'm not suggesting that you do that, right? I'm just telling you what my experience has been, right? Coming to what you asked specifically, Arjun, that, what you pointed towards me. Currently, I see both sides of the coin because I'm a full-time employee. But, as the non-profit that I volunteer with, that I started, I also have employees, right? And what I can see is that, as an employee, I have been blessed to have the most wonderful managers, wherein I've never faced, instances of micromanagement, or there's no login, logout system, etc. Which means I can design my life the way I want. Right? Of course, I have calls, and all of that is there. I have to like fly, like, I think on an average every 3 or 4 days. So that's a lot of time on an airplane. That's a different thing. But as long as I'm just working, I have the freedom to figure out, like, as long as I get my job done, that's enough, right? As an employer, I apply the exact same principles, right? So whoever works with me, a direct report, a full-time employee, or an intern, right? I'm like, on a Monday morning, afternoon, I'm like, listen, can we get XYZ done? Do you think this is possible, right? By Friday, maybe, right? If yes, great. If not, we'll continue next week, right? But throughout the week, as long as they don't need any support from your inputs from me, right? It's fine. I don't have to check with them. Where are you? Where are you working from? I don't care. As long as the work is happening, that's okay. That's more than enough, right? And on the final thing that you were mentioning, Arjun, about, say, management consulting, people in different parts of the hierarchy. I would say management consulting itself is fairly notorious. It has that, its reputation for precedes itself, right, as a field, because of the sheer number of hours. And, I think, from what I understand, from my interactions with people in this field, it's not just about the amount of work you do in management consulting. It's also about, that you're answerable to clients, to external stakeholders, right? And you can have all kinds of demand thrown at you at odd hours of the day, right? And since you get compensated so well, you have so much of responsibility in that sense. The levels that you're playing at, you just can't turn it down, right? I'm saying this to make a very specific point over here, which is, every industry has its own nuances in that sense as well, right? I mean, this might be a very controversial thing to say, but I would say that in a lot of industries, no one is working 40 hours in terms of serious work. We are at our screens. By the way, I also do that. It's not about someone else, right? We are sitting in front of our screens, our computers, laptops, for X number of hours, but are we actually working? Right? I've seen what works the best for me is that, I work in a very focused manner away from phone and have all distraction for 40 minutes. That's enough. I'm exhausted. Then I need 20 minutes of doing absolutely nothing, and then I'm back again. Right? So all these nuances over there. But sorry, that's a very long-winded answer to what you start off with. But yeah.
I get that because I think it is a multi-factor sort of an equation, right? There's a lot of different types of parameters you have to take into account to determine what is the right amount of hours you need to put in. I think both of you have contextualized one thing very clearly, that work-life balance is very personal to every individual, and it should not be an umbrella thing that is defined by somebody else for you. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Um, but the nuance is this, and the challenge is this. And I would say, Yash, I mean, your point is valid about the management consulting thing, but I have seen this challenge and nuance that I'm going to talk about across industries because, like you said, every industry has its own way of doing things, but ultimately, you can see the trend becoming more and more workaholic kind of focus culture out there. Like whether you talk about startups, whether you talk about the finance industry, whether you talk about even D2C and retail and all this, right? People are just becoming more ambitious overall on average. Okay. Um, why is this happening? In my view, I think kind of success breeds success. When you see others achieving new heights in their career, more often than not, you get very impacted and influenced by that, right? So you're sitting at home and you're thinking, okay, if I land this job, that's good enough for me, right? I would have made it in life. And then you start your job and you realize there are 10 people around you who are clocking in 14-hour days and are making more than you, or getting getting more work, more important responsibilities, more opportunities than you, etc., etc., right? Kind of the so-called tangible measures of success that they see around them. That, I mean, you really have to be kind of living under a rock, or kind of putting blindfolds on you or something, to really not see that, right? So you get impacted. And so your success definition, a lot of times, even though all three of us can say very nicely, and say that it should be personal and put a bow on it, and be very happy, but it doesn't really practically work that way. Success becomes very relative most of the times, because what happens, I think, Krusha, you might have actually experienced this, and I'd love to hear your take on this. A lot of times, companies are coming up with, for example, these parental leaves or maternity leaves, which provide, let's say, up to 3 months, 6 months of paid leaves, right? Now, this is considered a very big benefit and a boon for women and men who are trying to raise a family. But what really happens is, the folks who actually drop out for 3 months or 6 months, they do suffer in their careers, right? I've seen this firsthand, and secondhand, people around me and I myself, where either your pay goes down for that year or for the next couple of years, your opportunities, your promotion path, many things get impacted. And this is a blanket statement. It may not work like that for every single organization, but by and large, it does, right? So there is this hidden sort of downside of just keeping success personal if you don't get influence, right? So that's why people end up, even if they want to work for 8 hours a day, they end up working 10-hour days or 12-hour days, right? So question here is, how do we deal with that external factor of how the organizational culture is, how other people are working? And should we think about a work-life balance in a way where it's okay to hinder our ambitions and our success, like have more balanced life, but then compromise on success? Or should we give up on this concept of balance and just do whatever it takes to be successful, right? Krusha, would love your take on this.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I still think it is definitely personal, and I agree what you say that there is a lot of noise. So, which is why I think it's really important to sit down and do that redefinition time and again. Because, and I'll give you an example. If you ask me, and it's very gray, it's not black or white, which is another important thing. If you ask me, if I look at, I have a lot of friends in investment banking or in consulting, who obviously are making great money, and it never tempts me, to be honest, because the values are very, because I know the trade-off, right? There is always a trade-off. um, and it needs to be, everyone's ambition is very different. I would consider myself very ambitious, but my ambition looks different. So if the trade-off is getting on a flight every week, or every other week, or knowing that I might have to work hours in the night, that I won't get my 8 hours, I'm not okay with not being there at bedtime. And to be honest, now as a parent, of course, more, but even before I was a parent, honestly, your values often, I've seen that often a lot of values are constant in you. For me, I remember when I started working full time when I was 19. I remember joining an agency, and I was no one to tell them that, you know what, it's an agency culture, as we know. I was no one to tell them that I would leave at 7 p.m. In my interview round. I said, there's no way I'm sitting after 7 p.m. It wasn't because I have a problem. After that, like today, I have a session, I'm doing this. I have a coaching session at 8:30 p.m. that today I'm going to take because it's with Europe. I have once done for my day job. I have done a demo at 3 a.m. because it was with US, and that was the only time. It was a really important deal. So it's not like I would not make exceptions, but it's a very value trade-off. So if me doing that is something that's giving me joy in that moment, or the value that that specific exception is bringing is high, I would do it, right? So I think that it's very nuanced, which we need to consider. The other thing in that is, which is why it goes back to that conversation where you said, like, when people are saying it from their perspective, it's important that people have choice. My fear is that if every organization becomes like that, that's a problem, because then there is no choice for someone whose ambition looks different. Right now, at least, like, for example, I've been at the same company for 8 years. I'm still a director of the company. I'm very invested. I work there, I mean, working with them every day. um, and I have chosen to like for me, jumping ship, I don't think in my, like, once in my mind have I thought of ever going to competition or ever, it's not appealing to me. It's for me, my when you need to be very clear on your value system, which is what I'd say. Like, getting very clear on your values really helps all decisions, when to say yes, when to say no, because if it's aligned with your value, yes. If it's not aligned with your value, no. So doing this, for example, staying at the same job, being very believing in the product, very important to me. Working with good people, very important to me. So I'll make the exception today if they ever ask me to take a meeting at 9 p.m., which they don't, because that's just the culture. But if it ever is, and there would have been certain moments where it is, one, they do it with the respect that it is an exception, and I do it with the passion, because I know, like, what I'm investing in, the kind of people I'm investing in, the value return is great. So I think it's very nuanced there. So shutting that noise and sitting down and saying what is important to me, what is the trade off, is this trade off okay? Maybe a last example I'll give. Sometimes, I love creating content on LinkedIn or on Instagram is a choice. No one is asking me to do it, right? Choosing to coach like at an hour like this, but taking up one more client, I could have just not taken it up, right? No one's forcing me. This is even different because there's choice. So I think having that choice to do it, and work often can bring you joy as well. You need the breaks, but as Yash spoke of, I genuinely enjoy working. So it is also a value, like having the chance to do work that you actually like doing makes a huge difference, as opposed to if you're forced at a certain level to do certain work for hours that you're not even enjoying. It's a very different story. So it's easy for me to say I'll do that call at 8:30. If you were calling me for that same call at 8:30 that I don't care about, I don't add much value there, they don't add much value to me, whether in compensation or in passion or in other ways, it's a whole different story.
Got it. Got it. That's very helpful to, I think, contextualize things. Yash, would love your take on this same exact question as well.
There's this concept of local maxima, right? Which means that before this whole world of media, social media infiltrated our societies and cultures, um, for example, if I live in a small town, right, let's just say 20 years back, right, my local maxima would be my neighbors, right, probably someone across the street, or maybe at maximum someone in my town itself, right, even at the other end or something, right. If I stretch it a lot more than probably a neighboring few hamlets, right, but not much outside of this, right. Today, everyone has to go, compare and compete with the Jonases, right. The concept of local maxima has evaporated. It's over, right. It's dead in the water. Which means is there's no finish line. Nothing is enough, right? I can assure, and for audiences listening, right? I can assure you that today, no matter where you're working, at what compensation, with what, how many hours, what designation, right, etc., you might have, in your mind that, yeah, maybe a 50% increase or a doubling or something, right? Or this designation or this company or this role will really make me happier, will get me to that. It won't happen, right? Because it's over, in the sense the internet, makes you compete and compare yourself with everyone, right? Which is just unrealistic, right? The other thing is, just building on what Krusha was saying earlier, which is that a lot of it also depends on how you look at work, right? For some people, and especially in context of, and I can see this in the comments as well, a lot of companies in India don't compensate people enough. Like, I think at some places salaries haven't gone up for 20 years. In that time, I mean, in terms of real purchasing power, your salary has come down by 80% or something, right? Roughly, give or take, right? In, like, if you adjust for inflation, right? So work life balance is one thing, right? But you also need to be compensated well enough so that you can at least live. You can afford the basics, right? Otherwise, it's like what we started this conversation with, that the fear is there won't be any options for people to make the kind of choices that they do, right? I have had even today I have the privilege of speaking to multiple new people every day in terms of, this career guidance, mentorship, whatever, for the policy field. Having spoken to like thousands of people in the past 7-8 years, I can tell you one thing for sure: success looks extremely different to different people. We have very different starting lines, right? For a lot of people, just let's just say working beyond the normal requirement is a passion because they want to accomplish something, get to somewhere, whatever, that's fine. For a lot of people, they don't have an option. They just have to, maybe a lot of these jobs don't pay well enough at all, right? And they, don't have a choice but to do other things to just keep up with the bills, right? For a lot of people, they're like, you know what, I'll have very little, and that is enough. And the attitude, and this is something someone else was telling me earlier, that I'm extremely happy to see you prosper and succeed by doing something I have no interest in doing. Right. So, I'm very happy to see you succeed and prosper by doing something that I have no interest in doing. Right. So there are people with that kind of attitude, which is also phenomenal. I wish I had that, right? That kind of outlook. So yeah, that's what I would add.
Got it. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. People have definitely tried to prioritize things more. I think that's what I'm realizing, that when we say success is personal, what people are also realizing are the trade-offs involved with work-life balance, right? It's okay to not go after the same opportunities that let's say, people in your close-knit circle might be wanting you to go for, right? It's okay to go for something that is more ambitious than what people around you want you to go for. And a lot of times gender norms dictate this, like what men are supposed to achieve versus what women are supposed to achieve. But there are many other things, right? Your socioeconomic background also would probably dictate that. And I think both of you have pointed out that no approach is right or wrong. You have to decide for yourself what you really want, because end of the day you will end up compromising on something. I saw all around me people really going after what they want, but in the process, their health significantly kind of went south. And it was something that they came to realization quite quickly, but they didn't really do anything about it until it was dire straits and they had to take action, right? And so definitely there was regret, but these people made the choice, right? It wasn't that they didn't know what was happening. There were indicators coming up every now and then, and they decided, I'm kind of stuck in a way that I can't leave my work and have to continue. So I think it's that element of knowing what the trade-offs are and being hyper aware about it, to make sure that you're prioritizing things where you don't have regrets. And I think both of you have really emphasized on that beautifully. So I'm glad that you were able to cover that. Just before we get to the next topic, I wanted to make sure that people know we will be taking up your questions in case you have any questions. I think a lot of times people don't really have questions on this matter. It's just very strong opinions. Um, so we'll see how many questions we actually get on this one, and would definitely take those up. But yeah, to go to our next topic on this front, it's something you have already touched upon at a high level, I believe, but would love to really get deeper and more direct answer to this, as to how do you actually create an environment where you can pursue the things that you want. Both of you seem to have answered that you're doing the work that you love, you're doing things that you really enjoy, and it's kind of almost like a luxury, or kind of sort of something that not everybody has the ability to pursue. So how did you create that for yourself, right? How should people be able to a better understand what their priorities are, and b design a life that would help them align their work and life with those priorities? Trisha?
Sure. I mean, this is exactly what I do with a lot of women. This is exactly what we sit to do. I'll try to give you maybe a short version of it. Um, I think there are two aspects that I've seen work for myself. I'll talk personally first. One is clarity, as we said. So, and I don't mean, often when we say clarity, we simply, put a very simple goal in front of us, saying clarity on this is the job, or this is the salary, or it needs to be a lot more nuanced. Like I said, you need to get very clear on your values. You need to get clear on how do you like to be spending your day in the next 3 years, in the next 5 years. I think those are the questions to ask yourself when you're trying to get clarity on where you want to go, so that you know what work life balance looks like to you. Honestly, that does a large part of the work, because and of course I'm talking with privilege of when you've done maybe the initial work, or you don't have the problem of putting food on the table in the next month, that sort of situation. But in a regular situation with a lot of people on LinkedIn that we speak to, the clarity is number one. Second thing, I've posted about this a lot in Jan, actually, because it's been my mantra for Jan and it's really been working so far, which is soon to say, but 4 weeks. uh, as a working mom, I have a toddler who's almost 2. Two things that have worked for me. One, one activity at a time. This has been a game changer. I know it sounds simple, but I think what we miss in work life balance sometimes is also it's not just about the hours you're working, it's a lot about the mental energy in the hours you're not working as well, because you're mentally still working. Are you still thinking about that project, or are you not happy with your job? So there's a lot of things going which does drain energy. So your mind thinks you've not stopped working, you're literally working 24/7. There's no, except when you get some sleep, there's no stop to that, right? So I think closing that mental dialogue is really important. The way I do it, right, of course, one part is if you're unhappy, then first fixing that in the first part. But if you're okay with the way things are and it's just about balance, then the one activity one time. So if I think about it, I tell you the number of things that happen in one day, it would be a lot. Like, in the sense, I'll have 1 hour of playtime in the morning, then I'll have, like, we're reading books, then there's a coaching session, then again there's a school drop off, then I start like day job, then there's lunchtime, I'm actually feeding lunch, then put to nap, then there's more work, then there's a football class in the middle, and then I'm back to a live like this, and I'm constantly switching between very different activities. And the thing that has helped a lot is one activity one time. So if I'm uploading content, I literally upload my content, I don't think about it after that. If I'm in a meeting, I'll just make sure how can I add the best value to this meeting right now, and then it's done. So I think that is just my second tip that I think has been really helpful for me. So I think that would work. The third is a combination of the two, but knowing your non-negotiable. So you rightly said, Arjun, during the conversation, that it's not like people are not aware that something is happening, like the health is deteriorating, or something is happening. Kind of ignore it. I think knowing your non-negotiables is really clear. So for me, I do take on a lot of work because I enjoy doing work. For me, the two right now, and this again evolves, ways I know if I need to fix something is, one, if my health deteriorates, that's number one, because knowing that the longevity of anything I want to do, work or non work, is dependent on my health being okay. So if my health goes for a toss, I know something needs to be fixed in my work life balance. Two, if I feel like I end the day feeling, and I end more than one day feeling that I have not spent enough time with my son, that's a non-negotiable for me, because I know that time's not coming back, and I never want to regret it 8 years later that, oh, I should have worked a little lesser. So I think that those are my two big triggers. So I'll know if that's ever happening, I need to fix it. So I think knowing that and recognizing that, saying, okay, that's probably a time to sit down, have a conversation, see what needs to change.
Mhm.
And three, also for me, the third non-negotiable there is feeling only continuously stressed out about work. I think it's a core value for me that while any work comes with stress today, in the sense we can't ignore it. Of course, there are deadlines, there's negotiations, there's all these things that exist in our world. But if I am for a larger percentage not enjoying it than enjoying it, that's again a problem for me. So I think knowing those non-negotiables, and everyone here maybe sitting down and doing that for yourself, is something I'd recommend.
Brilliant. Um, Thank you for sharing that. I think a lot of very practical pointers. So I really appreciate that. Yash, so I will throw a curveball for you again. Okay. Apologies in advance. And this is a slightly, to be honest, like a heavy topic that weighed down on many, many people, including me, for a long time. Okay. So I do want to bring it up because I think it's important. Um, we are talking about designing a life for yourself, right? Which works for you, which helps you build this work-life balance, personalized success for yourself. And you both seem to be doing fantastic work on that, right? Because before I even asked the question, you brought up elements of how to do that or why you should do that. Now, there was this case of a young employee at Ernst& Young at EY that passed away recently. And um, we know kind of what happened, at least what played out in the media. We don't know the exact details. But taking that as an example, again, it can be very hard for people, especially at different junctures of their career, of their life, to have that privilege, as Krusha said, to design a life that they really want, right? Within uh, the confounds of this kind of the limitations of this framework, that your life is not always your life. It's dictated by what your family wants from you, what your employers want from you, what your friends want from you. How do you uh, how do you kind of manage that expectation while also creating the life that you want for yourself, right? So I'm not sure if there's a right answer for this, but I've definitely wanted to seek answers. So that's the reason I wanted to bring this up today.
I think, Arjun, I'll start off on a slightly tangential note for this, okay? Which is my very fundamental belief in life is that every single freedom comes from financial freedom, including from your family's thoughts that you might not agree with, right? So, as long as you're paying your own bills, right, you're taking care of yourself, right, uh, basically leading, let's just say, a quasi-adult life, although I believe everyone is just making it up, but that's okay, right? uh, that's enough, right? So by that, what I mean is that, quite frankly, you will be doing yourself the greatest disservice if, from the day that you start earning, right, whatever that amount might be, right, wherever that might be, and whatever the scope or project you might look like for you, you don't create a bird's nest. I have lost count of the number of times in my life wherein I could make the right choices just because I did not need the money from the wrong options, right? So it was of no value to me because I didn't care. I couldn't care lesser, right? Even till date, right? So the point being that first is earn that freedom for yourself, and does not have to be a corpus, by the way, right? Just a few months, right? That can get you by. You can just make that the choice for yourself, right? The moment you start doing that, I mean, I can't speak on behalf of all families, but even for most families, they start looking at you differently. This person is doing his or her own thing, right? They're figuring out their own life, making their own choices, and that's a very certain way of looking at it, right? The second thing is, and it's criminally underrated, which is just saying no. You have to say no to be able to say yes, right? What we were just discussing earlier, right? I say a no to, I would say, more than 9 out of 10 opportunities that come my way, right? For me, be to be able to say yes to that. How I think a lot of people on Twitter, I'm chronically online, I'm sorry, right, say that if it's not a hell yes, it's a no, right? So I myself have to get better at it. I agree, but still, to a large extent, I just say no to most things that are like okay or not worth my time in that sense, right? So as long as you can strike that balance, right, what is really worth your time, what is not. That's there. And the final bit, right? And Arjun, you're familiar with the work we do at PPI, for example, right? I mean, we've been interacting on and off for the last couple of years. You might have seen some of it evolve. The point here being that you also have to know the why of what you're doing something, of why you're doing something. So one is, of course, you have a job, it pays your bills, that's great, right? So that's for the soup. You might be doing something for the soul as well, right? You might be doing something just out of passion or something that you wish to do, right? I was just telling one of my friends yesterday that most of my weekends till almost April of this year are already booked out, in the sense I love to teach. Okay. So, different universities engagements, I'm just flying around just so that I can teach and share whatever I've learned. But that is completely voluntary and optional. That's because, quite frankly, it doesn't drain energy. It just gives me a lot of, scope to do things and keeps me happy. Right. So you have to figure out the why as well. Right. So again, very briefly summarizing, just create that financial blanket for yourself. A tiny one does not have to be a corpus. We are all not born with privilege, and that's the default, right? It's a feature, not a bug, right? But create the corpus for yourself, a small amount, right? That just gives you a few months of flexibility, right? That'll really change the attitude of those around you as well, and you will be a lot more confident to make the choices that you wish to, right? Say no to most things so you can say yes to the right things, and finally, just know the why of why you're doing something, right? It really help put things into perspective and allow you make better choices. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
May-
absolutely, absolutely.
Maybe just a
Um,
small thing to add there, Arjun. I think Yash summed it up really well. I think in the example that you mentioned, also in those situations, I think as systems we can do better for
Yeah.
sure. So while of course I agree with Yash that at the end of the day we all need to take charge of our life and figure these things out. I think when we are younger, especially, it takes time to sort of get to that place. It looks different for everyone at what age you finally start, getting a hold of that, depending on your surroundings. I think if we set up systems in schools, in colleges, in of course in workplaces, to support these conversations that we are having here right now, if because what we're saying is everyone to do that. At the end of the day, I coach 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds who also need that support, right? So for a 21-year-old or a 23-year-old, they do need that support as well. Otherwise, the only thing they're hearing is what their friends are saying or what their family is saying. So I think we should be on the way to create those systems so that hopefully we avoid, things like this.
Yeah, absolutely, Krusha. I think very well said. I don't see an easy solution though, because there is a fundamental disconnect between folks who are creating these systems, right? And I think that's why organizations have such different takes. You have a Meesho which would have like 10 days off company wide during some of the most busy times for other competitors, and then you have a Zepto where the founder says that I hope work-life balance spreads to
Yeah.
every competitor we have. That'll be a great competitive advantage for us, right? So you have both sides of the aisle, and there's a deep disconnect. And one of the things which I think we have touched upon, but I have really realized, when we say success is personal, a lot of times people take it as, well, I can decide how far I want to go in my career. That's the typical understanding of that statement. But I have a slightly different take of what that means, what success is personal. I think as a society, and because Krusha, you brought up the whole system point here, I thought as society, we have significantly undervalued the success that we create outside of work, at
Mhm.
home. And that part of our life is not traditionally attached to so-called definition of success. If you're a great sibling or a son or daughter or a parent, if you have a hobby outside of work which only you care about and none of your
Mhm.
folks around you care about, if you're in great shape and health yourself, I mean, that's something that people are realizing more now with a lot of awareness campaigns
Yeah.
happening. But even then, like, most people are not prioritizing health today even. So there are a lot of these things which I personally consider part of your core success
Mhm.
definition, which most people don't. So when we say success is personal, the first thing is, okay, I can decide whether I want to make X or Y in my career, whether I want to, get that promotion or not. Sure, that is one aspect of it.
Mhm.
But why should we disassociate
Yeah.
success with what we are doing in our personal lives, right?
That is
Um,
so true, Arjun. It comes back because you were saying that comes back to that value thing again. Because
Yep.
for me, for example, when you were talking, I realized like in my head, you know how you, uh, because we all give interviews now because everybody is being asked for things. So in your head, I always felt like, okay, 5 years from now, 8 years from now, if I'm asked what was, what am I most proud of in my career, and it's already true in these 3 years, pregnancy plus 2 years of this, is that I could grow in my career without compromising on growing personally, right? Without enjoying motherhood, not just being there. Honestly, I think you can parent in different ways, and there's absolutely okay. But for me to have been there, not felt a tinge of regret, or to feel like I enjoyed motherhood, is such a core value for me in my career that I build my career around it. I would not take on a job that asked me to come 5 days a week, no matter what. It comes with privilege, as Yash said. It takes something to build, so you can say that no. But there's no way if someone tells me to come to office right now 5 days a week, I can, like, in my sleep say no for sure, because it's so close to that value. And you know what you said about how we define success, maybe a last thing is identity. Again, I do this work with clients a lot, and identity of a lot of people, all of us, is a lot tied into the work we do, which means when that work is taken away or that success is not achieved to that level or in the format that is expected, it doesn't just hit your pocket, it often hits your identity. So people have it, like coach a lot of moms and who'd been working a lot before, and then they become moms and there's suddenly an identity crisis. It's like, who am I? Because you're actually doing a lot more than you did before. But who am I? Because that was such a core part of my identity. So again, a value I have in my head, and I always play this picture for myself, is that honestly, if 15 years from now all I'm doing is suddenly, I've changed my job and I'm just working in a bookstore, maybe writing books and like recommending books and all, I think I would consider myself very successful in that thing, right? So I think it's just changing that narrative of
yeah.
attachment.
No, very well said. Yash, any thoughts on this? I mean, it was less of a question, more of a just a viewpoint. So feel free to add your thoughts.
Absolutely. Maybe I'm definitely oversharing, I would say, but I could agree more with Krushan. I'll tell you why, as it with an example that personally I have this whole sort of an idea designed for myself, which is at this stage of my life and career, right? I'm 27. I've been working for about 6 years now, right? And probably for the next 6, 8, 10 more years, I just wish to get to a stage, right, wherein I can then, really have that sense of freedom. And by that, I don't mean, what is very popular on Twitter and Instagram, that you have a $2 billion in your account. No, not that, right? But just enough wherein I can just, do what I want. I own all my time, and quite frankly, support my partner, whatever it is that she wishes to do, right? Or, just be a good parent, right? As and when we get to that stage, right? But the point being that just be there for my family, right? Be capable enough to do whatever is needed, right? So as of today, since I live by myself, right, I don't have responsibilities in that sense, right? I can put in that extra work or time depending on my choice and if I so wish to, right, and really build things up as and when I want, right? Again, that is privilege that I want for myself. That is, but that is privilege nonetheless, right? But that would be success for me. Then maybe in a few years, just get to a stage where, yeah, just make choices completely dependent on what would be the best for my family, right? More than what would please my boss or my manager, right? So I couldn't agree more with what Krusha said about what you mentioned, Arjun. So, yeah,
All
I'm so
right.
sorry, Arjun. I will let you all wrap up, but in the light of work-life balance, I want to make it to bath time, so I am going to go make sure I can give my son a bath. And
Yes,
I thank you
absolutely.
so much for having me, though.
Sure, absolutely. I think we are also wrapping up, but thank you so much for joining, Krusha. I really appreciate it. And all the best, with the call that you're going to have next.
Thank you so much.
thanks.
All right, thanks. Yash, actually, there was just one question. There are a couple of them that have come up here, but I think one that I definitely want to take up, and it's something from Ratish. I think he talks about something you touched upon earlier, which was, that many CEOs are demanding for longer working hours, and people who are countering them are using that point around, disproportionate pay that they receive versus people, let's say, at lower levels in the organization. That, as well as the fact that everybody's been talking about, how lack of work-life balance can be deteriorating for your health, both from mental and physical health standpoint.
Yeah,
So, do you think, like, because you also talked about having financial freedom and reaching that stage to be able to design the life that you want, um, do you see any sort of like conflict there, right? Like, because people who are at the lower level generally don't get paid that well. So
yeah.
are we saying like it's okay to push yourself hard, not really have a work-life balance at the earlier stage, and then build towards a point where you can have the balance? Or like, what's your thought on this whole pay aspect related to work-life balance?
Absolutely, Arjun. I look at this very differently. I'll tell you why. So, firstly, very clean, straightforward blanket statement that no one should be underpaid, right? So there's absolutely no justification for that. And if you go by any statistics, any data, the C-suite pay has grown disproportionately more as compared to the rest of the workforce around the world, right? And that is, like, what in economic term we say that more value is accruing to capital than to labor, right? So which means to investors than to workers, right? And that's just a big mismatch which shouldn't be happening, which is not healthy for any society or any economy in the longer run. Because if people can't consume what you're producing, who are you producing for? That's gonna hit your bottom line at some point. Anyways, that's one thing, right? Keeping that aside, I would say the other bit also is that for most people, right, and especially in light of the conversation we're having anyways, Arjun, right now, that increased pay might not necessarily, solve for the work-life balance paradox anyways. In the sense, there are a lot of people, and rightly so, for whom money becomes immaterial beyond a point, and they would be like, you know what, you can't buy my time, no matter how much you pay me, after a certain number of after a commitment for a certain number of fixed working hours, right? So
Hmm.
what I'm trying to reflect at over here is, especially since you brought this up in the context of pay and work-life balance, right? That yes, the two are linked, but the two are not the same things, right? Yes, absolutely, you should be compensated well enough for the efforts you're putting in and the value that you're creating, right? But at the same time, do ask yourself that even if I get paid twice, for example, would I be okay with working double the number of hours, or even maybe slightly more, right? Just to make up for the new compensation that I'm receiving, right? Probably not, right? So it's again, it just brings me back to what we started the conversation today with, which is, since there's no local maxima and you're comparing yourself with everyone at all times, right? This whole idea of success, while it is very personal, there'll never be a finish point. There'll never be an end point, right? And so it'll ultimately boil down to you figuring out that, what, with my current life context, with my current skill set, and where I'm born, because I mean the passport privilege, for example, that's a real thing, right? There are all sorts of things, right? So wherever I'm based right now, what's the best that I can make out of it? And more importantly, can I just maybe put like a 5% extra, not at work, but for my life, decisions or planning or career orientation in general, so that I can get out of this as soon as I can, right? That's what I would add.
All right, great. I think very valid points, very valid points. And both you and Krusha added new insights to this hackneyed sort of debate and conversation that has just been going on for way too long. So really glad that we did this. Yash, thank you again for being here, for sharing, all those personal and professional insights that you've gathered. We're getting some really good feedback from folks who have attended this, saying, there's some very relevant and insightful points that were shared by both you and Krusha. So again, thank you for joining, and thank you to everyone in the audience who was patient enough to stay with us on a weekday evening. I hope this was not just interesting, but value adding in some form or fashion. I hope it helped you understand how to design your life in a way where you can achieve your both life and work related goals. And in case you're looking for any support with regard to your career goals, right? Especially if you're thinking about any sort of a transition, do check out Pivot. It's at mypivot.work. The link is in my signature here. And I would also say that you can connect with folks like Yash and Krusha on our platform, who can help you build a more mindful and well-designed life for yourself that doesn't just focus one element but all your key priorities, right? So do check us out. Do reach out to Yash and Krusha if you think it would be helpful. Thank you, and I hope you have a great rest of the evening. Bye.